Hey guys, it's IDW, and today we're going to be talking about a few things that are really the basics of high-level programming function. And those things are variables, if-then-else statements, and loops. And these things are probably things that you've probably heard stuff about if you know a bit about programming, but I'm going to be going over these things at a low level because you might be able to guess how they work from what I've been over so far, but there's a few key important things that there are in addition to what you might expect. So let's go ahead and jump right into things talking about variables. Now, your first impression when you think of a variable is that, oh, you just use a register. I mean, isn't the point of a register just to store value in it? Yes, it is. However, we're actually just going to set a value in memory instead of using our registers to store data. So why don't we just use a register? Well, there is one really big reason, and that is that using a register is going to really limit our options as to where we're going to store our variables. So first of all, we can store more than one value in one register. It's just a question of using a few increment instructions to make it so that our data pointer is pointing into the right memory address for the right variable that we want to use at a certain point. And this is really, really, really powerful, especially in stuff like lists, which we'll get to later. There's a lot more stuff that has to do with this one. But then there's the more obvious one, which is that it increases the total number of variables that a program can have. If you only have 4 variables, one for each register, then you're not going to have a good program. It's just going to be it's just awful. You don't want to have 4 variables. You don't want to limit yourself like that when you could have all of the variables that are open to you in memory. 4 is the number of registers in the computer that we're using in this series, by the way. It could be more depending on how good your computer is, but for our purposes, I'm just going to put it at 4. So, the next thing we're going to talk about is the if-then-else statement. Now, an if-then-else statement is a choice that a computer makes, and it's probably something that you know about if you have any experience programming whatsoever. And it's the most obvious means of branching that we have. So, if the way that an if-then-else statement works is that if a certain condition is met, then we're going to do this. Otherwise, we're going to do something else. So, this kind of logic uses something called a Boolean, which we've talked about before in branching, you might recall. A Boolean is a true or false statement that tells us whether or not we're going to branch to a certain address. That is where this is used. So, we're going to have a certain condition. If it's true, we're going to branch to a different instruction, and then we're going to do all the stuff that's listed there if that condition is true. Otherwise, we're not going to branch and we're going to go through the next bit of code normally. And like I said, it's done just by branching. And also, if you're using an else statement, then you do have to make a separate branch command that you're going to... So like, let's say we're actually coding something in, okay? So we've got our if instruction. So if it's true, we're going to branch around the if statement and go to a certain address in memory that's ahead of where we are now, and at that point in memory is where all of the instructions to do if this condition is met. Whereas if that condition is not met, then you're going to keep going through your instructions normally. But when you get to that piece of code where the instructions that you do if the condition is met, then you want to branch over them to the end of those instructions so that you don't do them because the condition hasn't been met. And it's important that you do that when you're programming in a low level, and it's one of the main things that high-level languages can do that makes your life really easy for you. So, the last thing we're going to talk about today is a loop. Now, a loop is, well, all of these things are really important, but loops are something that I personally really love for some reason, and they're basically a way of repeating a certain piece of code a certain number of times. So, for example, right now, while the video is not paused, you're going to get the next frame from whatever server this video is stored in over and over and over again 30, 60 times a second. So that is what a loop is used for. You're going to go back through your instruction that tells you to get the next frame over and over again, and that's where that might be useful. Now, it's done by branching to instruction before the branch instruction. So that means that you're going to branch, you're going to go to some place before the loop began, and then you're going to go through the instructions in that loop, and then when you reach the end, you're going to branch again and go through those instructions again over and over and over again, infinitely, until the condition is no longer met. So, what I'm describing right now, however, is what's called a while loop. And these are things that you're going to do while a certain condition is true. So, for example, while you have not paused this video, gets the next frame. As soon as this video is paused, then you can stop getting the next frame. Anyway, got a bit carried away there. But now let's talk about for loops. So for loops are when you want to repeat something a certain number of times. So, for example, let's say you're going through a deck of cards, and you want to, let's say you want to shuffle a deck of cards 7 times to ensure that it's properly randomized. What you would do is you would say your shuffle thing, and you would go through it 7 times. And that would make it so that you would have to use a for loop. And then you would use that to repeat it 7 times. So let's talk about how these work for a second. So a while loop, I've already kind of explained how it works. That's where you just branch to instruction beforehand. A for loop is really just a while loop, only you're going to take a variable, and you're going to let's say that you have a variable that starts at 7, and then we decrement it once every time that we shuffle our deck of cards. So, what we're going to say is, while the value that tells us how many more times we have to shuffle is not 0, then we're going to want to go through our whatever code that we have for shuffling. And that is how a for loop works, and again, they're really useful. So, yeah. Anyways, that's going to be about it for today, so I hope you guys have enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.